Hey everyone, welcome back to Elder Gal. I'm Allison. So today we're going to talk about how life sucks. But it sucks even more if you want it to. In other words, you can make it a lot worse than it already is. And if you watched my video last week on the pursuit of happiness, basically, in other words, we're always chasing happiness and wanting things to be, wonderful and perfect and joyful, which is a ridiculous quest, frankly. But the point is, you get your happiness where you can get it. I'm a total believer in happiness. It's just not going to last 24/7 for, 10 years in a row. Generally, that's not the case. So the opposite is true too. The other side of the coin is the misery part, okay? And misery is going to happen. It's a normal part of being human. But we can make it so much worse on ourselves. We can live in that misery, just like people want to live in the happiness. Well, there's a whole segment of people that like living in the misery. I mean, they don't really like it. They just get stuck there. They don't know any different. And the problem is misery, not only will it bring you down, it'll bring everyone else around you down. It's contagious. It's like a smile is contagious. Well, misery is contagious. And there's a saying that misery loves company or something like that. Yeah. But anyway, so this video is about don't create more unhappiness for yourself. Don't create more misery for yourself. Life is hard enough. I'm reminded of it all the time. I live in a community where people just drop dead sometimes in their apartment and they don't find them for 3 days. Or somebody gets sick all of a sudden. They were fine and then they're gone. Or people don't, like myself, don't really have family around at all. So the thing is that you could be miserable all the time with all the things that happen, especially as you get older. But the thing is, what is the point of that? What is the point of that? I view life very pragmatically, which is that I take my joy where I can get it, and I try not to make the misery worse than it is. If something bad's going on, you get through it. You get through it somehow. You ever notice, I'll give you an example. When you're sick with a bug or something, like you have the flu or a cold or even, the vid word. When you have something like that and you'll probably get better, there's a point in the sickness in which you're just miserable. Right? You're just like, oh, this feels like it'll never end. Your brain knows it will end. Your brain knows you'll come out the other side of it. But generally, you have a point in that sickness when you just like, I feel like I'm always going to be like this. And that happens in life in general, too. But the same principle applies to whether you have a cold or just other things in life. Generally, most stuff, not all stuff, but most stuff you get through. And you get through the worst of it and you get to the other side. It all has the same trajectory. The only exception to that, of course, is if you had a terminal illness and it's actually going to kill you. Obviously, then you're not going to get better. But that's not what most of us deal with through most of our lives. Most of us are dealing with things that are transitory. They're not permanent. They're temporary. And a temporary inconvenience or problem or even disaster, you will get to the other side of it. You will get to the other side of it. So I did a video a while back on people that were energy vampires, and it kind of relates to this because people that are generally energy vampires, they basically swirl in negativity to some degree, and they infect everyone around them with it. Well, it's kind of related to what I'm talking about here, which is that if you're miserable, if you're always complaining, if you're always, thinking about the next bad thing that will happen, then you're kind of creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. In other words, you're going to look at everything negatively, so everything's going to seem worse than it is anyway, and you're going to be miserable. You're going to absolutely be miserable. And then you're going to go, see, I told you everything was bad. Well, you made it worse because of your attitude. So it comes back to attitude is everything. We can totally control the way we perceive things, and then the way we act on that. We totally have control of the way we see things and perceive things, and then what we do to act on it. Two people can go through the same circumstance, and one of those people will think, oh, this is the worst thing that's ever happened to me. I don't know how I'm going to deal with it. And the other person will go, yeah, this sucks. This is not good, but I'll get through it and it will get better. So guess which person is more miserable there? A or B? Okay, yeah, you guessed right, A. So if you're thinking that everything, like a mosquito bite, is like the world's worst injury to you, metaphorically speaking, then you're going to be miserable. You know, my grandmother, my Italian grandmother, I've talked about in a few videos that I've had, loved her dearly. And she could be a really amazing, she was incredibly intelligent. She was very vibrant. She could be a lot of fun when she wanted to be. But she also had a talent for misery. She had a talent for misery and a talent for being very dramatic about it. And I noticed that even as I was young. You know, she died when I was 30 years old, so I was around her as a young adult as well. And I learned from her. I learned that lesson from her about what not to do. In other words, if you're miserable, okay, be miserable for a day or a couple of days or whatever, but don't go out there and infect other people with it if you can help it. You know, when I'm really feeling my worst mentally, I actually prefer being alone. I prefer not being around someone else because I know that when I'm around someone else, I could obviously give that off to them and be in a grumpy mood because it's kind of hard for me to hide my feelings in many cases. So I think to myself, why would I want to do that? Why would I want to be around other people and make it worse? So I just basically ride that out. You know, I don't get in deep depressions. I don't remain in a bad mood for days and days at a time. So for me, when I am going through a bad phase, I just allow myself to do it for a day or a couple of days. And then I get to the other side of it. And then, you know, everything in life is transitory. Everything is impermanent. Everything is temporary. Your moods are temporary. The circumstances are temporary. Everything changes. And that's a good thing. Yet you can use that in your favor. In fact, to me, understanding the concept of change and how that works in your favor is actually a good thing because nothing ever stays the same. Nothing ever stays the same. Everything. It's either going to get, well, okay, it might stay the same for a little while, but basically things generally get better or they get worse. And if they get worse, then you deal with that if that happens. But I have found for the most part, most things in life get better. You go through a bad phase, it improves. You come out the other side. And the reason I know all this is because I made myself so much more miserable when I was in my phase of life I call the wasteland. I created my own hell. And after clawing my way out of that, that's how I learned that it's all about your attitude. It's all about your perception. It's all about what you do to deal with the negative things that are happening. You know, being content in life, being even happy in life, has a lot to do with just your attitude. It doesn't have to do with any external things. In fact, it's better if it doesn't deal with external things in a way, because that makes it actually more solidly in you. You can go through anything and maintain a certain amount of good perspective or good mood in that, undergoing no matter what it is. You know, one of the things I don't think I've shared on my channel before is that back about 11 years ago, I went through a life-threatening medical emergency. I had a gallbladder that went postal and it decided to take out my pancreas by lodging a stone in the pancreatic duct. Apparently, this is not that uncommon, but I had no idea that this could happen. That's the sickest I've been probably since I was in my maybe 20s. And I could have died. In fact, that's what the doctor at the hospital said to me. Basically, you could die. And I was so zen because for some reason I was in this good place mentally. For some weird reason, when that happened to me, I was in this really amazing place. And I thought, okay, if that's the worst that can happen, I can deal with that. And so I didn't freak out. And it amazed, I was admitted to the hospital. I was there 4 nights. They had to do this extensive procedure on me to make sure, and they had to keep me there to make sure my pancreas was coming back to normal. And it was really serious. You can die of acute pancreatitis. So it was a very serious medical thing. I never freaked out once during that whole time. I was very calm. I figured if it's my time to go, it's my time to go. And I learned from that. Of course, this happened actually the year before I went through a lot of spiritual growth. But it was a real sign to me that some part of me had that knowledge and that wisdom to know how to deal with that. And that's a great gift. That's a great gift once you know you can do that. Because then you know no matter what happens to you, you're going to deal with it in life. And so, I've thought about that for the last 11 years, how that was such an amazing experience to go through. And I really didn't know. I mean, my intuition, I think, knew that I was going to make it through it. So maybe that's why I didn't panic. I don't know for sure. But I do know that everybody around me at the hospital was concerned. The doctor was concerned. My nurses were concerned. They treated me really nicely because I think they thought, she might not make it. And yeah, I did. And I did with like an amazing calm. And I was very grounded and I was very mindful. I spent a lot of time meditating during that being sick. I was in the bed, I couldn't really do anything, and I would just close my eyes and meditate. And so my feeling is most things we go through in life, it really is all about the way we deal with it. And that means if you're going through a tough time, if you're going through misery, don't make it worse. In other words, find a way to make that experience more palatable, more easier to go through. And that all comes from your attitude and the way you choose to deal with things. In my channel, on my live stream, sometimes I talk about one of my favorite books is by Viktor Frankl called Man's Search for Meaning. And he was the one that really came up with this idea that attitude was everything. He said, we can choose our own attitude in any given set of circumstances. And he called that the last of the human freedoms, to be able to do that. And if you haven't read his book, I encourage you to read his book, because he survived being in Auschwitz during World War II, during, when the Nazis ran these concentration camps. And he survived that when all of his family perished. And he came out of it with an amazing attitude, which is that the way you survive has a lot to do with your attitude and your perspective. If you're in a concentration camp, I don't think most of us can imagine a worse circumstance than that. I don't think we can ever imagine being in something more horrible than that. But his point of view was that you could still sit on the steps of the barracks and look at a flower growing in the yard and focus on the beauty of the flower, or look at the sunset beyond the fence, or the sunrise, or look at the trees growing beyond the fence. He said there was always something beautiful to focus on instead of focusing on the horror of where they were at. So if he could do that, and other people who have been in similar circumstances can do that, we can certainly do that in our own everyday lives. If something bad is happening, choose to focus on something else, or choose just to have a different perspective on it. My perspective when I could have died from acute pancreatitis was, okay, if the worst that's going to happen is I die from this, I can deal with that. Well, if you can tell yourself that, not only aren't you going to freak out, but you're also not going to be miserable. And I think what happened is I put all my energy that I had into just a healing kind of mentality. that whatever was supposed to happen was supposed to happen, but I didn't panic about it. I didn't think, oh, the worst is going to happen. So I was thinking about this today, like I said, as a corollary to my last week's video on the whole pursuit of happiness. And I thought, well, yeah, the thing is, misery does happen. So what do we do with it? So that's my suggestion to you. It's a very simple one. Just control your attitude. Control your attitude. If something bad happens, you can say, oh, this was bad. But then you can also say in the next breath, I'll get through it. And that's what changes your attitude. It's amazing. It's so simple, and yet it's not easy for people to do. It's not easy. And I know that. It takes practice. You have to do it. You know, I've done it so long now that it comes second nature for me to get through stuff like this. But, you know, I've gone through really tough times in my life. I don't know that I've experienced things worse than the average person. I'd say it's about probably the normal amount of trauma that most people go through. I wouldn't say I've had it worse. I wouldn't say I've had it better. In some ways, it's been easier, I think. In some ways, it may have been harder. In some ways, I made it harder. Like I said, when I went through the wasteland phase of my life, which happened right kind of before this whole pancreatitis thing happened, I made things way harder for myself, and I was way more miserable, and I did not use my attitude to work in my own favor. So I learned from that. I learned from that over a decade ago, and I really do encourage you to work on your attitude if that's the thing getting in your way and it's making you more miserable. Because you know what? Life's hard. We don't have to make it more difficult. We certainly don't have to make it more difficult. So I hope that helps you today. Until next time, be well, be kind, keep moving forward, and take care. Bye.